With Papoose and Q, I put hands on him. Today, with Papoose and Q, I put hands on him. Today.
What if the breakup wasn't the end of the story, but the reset? Because according to what just went viral, Papoose didn't just leave Claressa Shields. He went straight back to the one chapter everyone thought was permanently closed. Remy Ma and the internet did not take that lightly. Within hours, clips started circulating. Side-by-side timelines, old interviews resurfacing, fans connecting dots faster than explanations could keep up. And then came the meltdown, not from the people involved, but from the audience. Because this didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a confirmation of everything people had been whispering about behind the scenes. What made this reunion hit so hard wasn't just who reunited with whom. It was how fast it happened. There was no cooling off period, no visible emotional processing, no time where the story felt unresolved. One chapter ended and another reopened almost immediately. And when transitions are that clean, people stop believing in chance. Fans aren't melting down because they love drama. They're melting down because the narrative shifted instantly. What once looked like a complicated love triangle now looks like a loop, a return to familiarity, a retreat to something that never fully ended. And once that idea takes hold, every previous explanation starts sounding different. Old statements about loyalty, old claims about moving on, old assurances that certain doors were closed forever. According to fans, this reunion makes all of that feel conditional. Like the ending people were watching wasn't really an ending at all. Tonight, we're breaking down why this reunion went viral so fast, why fans are calling it the final confirmation, and why the real meltdown isn't happening behind closed doors, it's happening online. Because when someone goes back to where they started, the question isn't who they love, it's who they were never done with. According to how the internet reacted, the reason this reunion caused an instant meltdown is simple. People felt like they'd seen this ending before it happened. The moment Papoose was spotted reconnecting with Remy Ma, fans didn't ask if it was true, they asked how long it had been heading this way. Because in their eyes, the signs were always there, just buried under public narratives and temporary distractions. What made this feel inevitable was the lack of emotional distance. According to fans, there was never a real separation in tone, language, or energy between Papoose and Remy. Even during periods when they weren't publicly aligned, there was familiarity, comfort, a sense of unfinished business that never fully disappeared. And when someone leaves one relationship and immediately re-enters another with that level of ease, it suggests the emotional groundwork was never dismantled. Timing played a huge role in the meltdown. The transition from Claressa Shields to Remy didn't look messy, it looked clean, almost rehearsed. According to fan analysis, clean transitions are rarely spontaneous. They happen when someone already knows where they're going next. And once that perception took hold, the story shifted from heartbreak to strategy. Fans also resurfaced old moments that now read differently. Interviews where Papoose spoke about loyalty in absolute terms. Clips where Remy hinted at unresolved connections. According to the audience, those moments no longer feel nostalgic, they feel predictive. Like breadcrumbs that only made sense once the reunion happened. This is why the meltdown wasn't about celebration or outrage alone. It was about confirmation. Confirmation that Claressa may have been a chapter, not the book. Confirmation that certain bonds don't dissolve, they pause. And confirmation that the public was watching a transition, not a choice being made in real time. At this stage, the reunion doesn't feel like a surprise. It feels like the last piece clicking into place. According to the way the internet processed this reunion, the meltdown wasn't really about Remy Ma or Papoose individually. It was about what the transition implied. Fans weren't reacting to a reunion. They were reacting to the speed, smoothness, and silence that surrounded it. Because when someone moves on this cleanly, it raises a question people don't like asking out loud. Was the door ever actually closed? What made the reaction explode was how quickly the narrative flipped. One day, the story centered on heartbreak, loss, and fallout involving Claressa Shields. The next, the focus shifted to familiarity, comfort, and history. According to fans, that contrast felt jarring. Not because people expected loyalty forever, but because emotional whiplash suggests overlap not necessarily in actions but in intent. Fans also pointed out the emotional tone difference. With Claressa, everything felt heavy, defensive, and complicated. With Remy, the energy looked relaxed, natural, almost relieved. According to the audience, relief is what happens when someone returns to something that feels known, not new. And when relief shows up that quickly, people assume the emotional exit happened long before the public one. Another reason the meltdown intensified was social media behavior. Subtle likes, old photos resurfacing, quiet acknowledgements without official statements. According to fan analysis, these weren't accidents, they were signals. Signals that didn't deny anything but didn't confirm either, the perfect grey area that lets speculation spiral. And spiral it did. This is why fans didn't wait for confirmation. They filled in the gaps themselves. Once people believe a transition was preloaded, they stop caring about explanations. Because explanations imply spontaneity, and nothing about this felt spontaneous. At this point, the meltdown isn't fueled by anger, it's fueled by pattern recognition. People recognize loops, familiar endings, relationships that pause instead of end. And when someone returns to the beginning, fans stop asking what went wrong and start asking what was always unfinished. According to how the meltdown unfolded online, the emotional center of this story shifted almost immediately to Claressa Shields, not because she spoke out, but because she didn't need to. The speed of the reunion did the talking for her. Fans began replaying everything she defended, everything she stood beside publicly, and everything she was criticized for enduring. And suddenly, her silence looked less like denial and more like realization. What hit people hardest was how disposable her chapter appeared in hindsight. Not disposable emotionally, disposable narratively. According to fan commentary, the moment Papoose reappeared alongside Remy, Claressa's role snapped into focus as a transition figure. Someone who absorbed chaos, defended loyalty, and held the public narrative together while someone else quietly waited in the wings. That realization is what triggered outrage not at Claressa but for her. Fans began calling out how much she carried publicly. The defending, the explanations, the confidence she projected while questions swirled behind the scenes. According to the narrative forming now, that confidence is being reinterpreted as protection, not of the relationship, but of herself. Because when you believe you're the main story, you don't suspect you're part of someone else's pause. This is also where the financial and emotional angles collided. People started connecting dots between access, defense, and exit. According to fan analysis, Claressa didn't just lose a relationship. She lost time, energy, and positioning in a situation that ended exactly where it began for the other person. That asymmetry is what made the meltdown go from gossip to anger. What intensified the firestorm was the lack of acknowledgement. No public gratitude, no transition respect, no acknowledgement of the role Claressa played. According to fans, that absence made everything feel transactional in hindsight, like she was necessary until she wasn't. At this stage, the narrative isn't asking whether Papoose had the right to move on. It's asking how long the move had already been decided. Because when someone returns to a previous chapter that fast, the middle chapter starts looking less like a choice and more like a bridge. And bridges don't get remembered for where they stand, they get remembered for who crossed them. According to how fans are now framing the situation, this reunion doesn't feel like a fresh beginning. It feels like a return to default. Not rekindling something new, but resuming something that was never emotionally dismantled in the first place. And that distinction is exactly why the meltdown hasn't slowed down. What people keep pointing out is familiarity. The body language, the comfort, the lack of awkwardness. According to the audience, nothing about this reunion looks tentative, it looks settled. And settled energy usually comes from history that never fully expired. That's why fans say this isn't about rekindling love, it's about re-entering a space that always felt like home. Another reason this feels full circle is how little explanation accompanied it. There was no announcement, no closure speech, no acknowledgement of the journey in between. According to fans, that silence is telling. When someone believes they owe an explanation, they usually offer one. When they believe the story explains itself, they don't. And in this case, the story many fans are telling themselves is simple. The ending already existed. This is where the narrative turns uncomfortable. Because if this reunion was always an option, then the time in between gets re-examined. Not as growth, but as delay. Not as moving on, but as passing time. And that reframing is what makes Claressa's chapter feel painful in hindsight. According to fans, she wasn't competing with Remy, she was filling space until the circle could close again. The reason this matters is because it changes accountability. It doesn't accuse anyone of cheating or plotting, it questions emotional honesty. Were intentions clear? Were chapters truly closed? Or were some doors left unlocked on purpose? Fans say those questions don't need answers to feel real, they already feel answered by behavior. At this point, the meltdown isn't about outrage, it's about clarity arriving late. The clarity that sometimes relationships don't end, they pause. And when they resume, everyone in the middle gets recast as temporary. This is why the reunion hits so hard. Not because it happened, but because it made everything in between suddenly make sense. At this point, the meltdown isn't about who reunited with who, it's about what the reunion revealed. Because when someone leaves one relationship and immediately returns to another that looks this comfortable, people stop arguing about morality and start questioning honesty. Not cheating, not betrayal, intent. What fans are reacting to isn't romance, it's sequence. The speed, the silence, the familiarity, all of it suggests that some chapters don't really end, they wait. And when they resume this easily, everyone caught in the middle gets redefined retroactively. Not as a partner, but as a placeholder. That's why this story hit a nerve. Because placeholders don't realize what they are until the door they were standing in front of opens again. This isn't about attacking Papoose or defending Remy. It's about acknowledging what behavior communicates when words stay quiet. And it's about recognizing how often emotional clarity arrives after damage has already been done. The hardest part of this story isn't the reunion. It's what the reunion confirms, that some relationships don't compete, they coexist, that some endings are only temporary pauses, and that the people who believe they're chosen sometimes aren't wrong, they're just early. Now it's on you. Do you think this reunion proves Claressa was always the in-between chapter? Or do you believe people are allowed to return to old loves without rewriting the past? When someone goes back this fast, does it mean the middle relationship was never real, or just real at the wrong time? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Keep it honest, not hateful. If this breakdown helped you see the pattern behind the panic, like the video so others can find it. Share it if you believe timing reveals more truth than explanations ever will. And subscribe for more long-form breakdowns that go beyond headlines and focus on behavior, power, and the moments that quietly tell the real story. Because sometimes the real meltdown isn't emotional, it's the moment everything finally makes sense.